Hi, I'm Anne Pollard, and this is the reading of my book, Cleo's Fabulous Adventures, The Realm of the Woods, Chapter 8, Fairy the Fox. Cleo caught up to Bacchus and walked beside him along the path. She looked over to admire how smoothly Bacchus moved. His shoulders would rise and fall with his footsteps, and his movement was so fluid he almost looked like he didn't even touch the ground. His black fur was reflecting the sun, and it illuminated all of the shades of black that were there. Cleo thought how amazing he was. Without a word, Bacchus smiled slightly at Cleo's silent compliment. As they walked away from the grassy woodland, the warmth, and the arid feel, they began to see a different type of woodland. This new part of the landscape had a variety of different trees, but sparse enough to allow the sunlight in. As they continued on, they came upon a large stream that was followed by an open meadow. The stream was so wide and deep, however, they could not cross it. Bacchus said, "We need to get to the meadow on the other side of the stream." Cleo shrugged, saying, "It's too deep for me to cross, Bacchus." He nodded back to Cleo. Then he turned around and seemed to be saying something to the trees behind him. As she watched, the trees began to move. First at the top, swaying like they were in a growing windstorm. Then the trunks began to sway as the wind grew stronger. The trees all moved with the same rhythm and in the same direction. Then ever so slowly, they began to lean toward the ground. It seemed as if the trunks would soon break in half, but instead they became fluid. As Bacchus nodded before them, the trees laid down fully on the ground. They were so tall that they completely spanned the stream to form the most amazing bridge. "Oh my gosh!" shouted Cleo. Bacchus turned back to Cleo and said, "The trees have offered to help us along our way. Shall we proceed?" Bacchus stepped up on the tree trunks and began to make his way across the stream. Cleo followed in utter amazement. As they reached the other side of the stream and stepped down from the tree bridge, the trees began to move again. In complete rhythm with each other, they rose up and returned to their standing place in the woodland. Cleo shouted, "Bacchus, that was incredible! How did they do that?" Bacchus smiled and said, "It's magic. In our world, anything is possible if you ask, see it, and allow it to happen." Bacchus then turned back to see the trees now on the other side of the stream. He bowed deeply and thanked the trees for their help. The trees bowed back one last time before resuming their uprightness. As Bacchus turned back to the meadow, he began to move forward along the new path. The meadow was brimming with flowers, bushes, and grasses of all kinds. The colors of the flowers were like a rainbow spread over the ground. There was something that was fluttering around the flowers. It looked like it could be butterflies or hummingbirds, but it was too hard to see from their distance. As they moved closer, Cleo could not believe her eyes again. They were fairies, thousands of them flying among the flowers. Cleo could hear them laughing and singing, and it was the most beautiful sound. They seemed to be playing hide and seek from each other, and then would burst out in laughter as they were seen. Then some would just disappear altogether for a few moments, only to reappear on the next flower. It was the most magical thing that Cleo had ever seen. Then out of the corner of her eye, she saw a flash of something that she couldn't make out what it was. Like the fairies, it seemed to be there for a moment and then just disappear. She concentrated to try and see it again. Another flash. This time she could make out a hint of red before it was gone again. Bacchus laughed. "Fairy, you can come out," he said. It appeared behind them. Cleo jumped in surprise. Both Cleo and Bacchus turned around to see a small red fox standing now in front of them. She had big pointed ears that stood atop her head and had a pointed nose. Her chin and chest were covered in thick white fur that went all the way down the front of her legs. It was such a contrast to the red fur that covered her shoulders, back, and belly. Her front legs were covered in black fur, and it made it look like she had on long gloves. Her tail was thick and covered with various shades of red, brown, and black fur. There was a beautiful white tip at the end of her tail. She wore a mischievous smile. Bacchus laughed again and said, "Hello, Fairy. I thought for a minute you had decided not to join us." Fairy laughed and said, "Hello, Bacchus. I was just having a little fun. You know I would not disappoint you." Bacchus said, "Yes, I know. You're here to teach Cleo some valuable lessons, aren't you?" "Indeed I am," said Fairy. "Cleo, it's nice to see you. I hope you're ready to have some fun." Cleo laughed at Fairy and her crazy antics. "Yes, that would be grand," she said. "May I first ask, though, where did you get your name? I see all these fairies around the flowers, and your name is Fairy. Is that a coincidence?" "Ha ha ha!" Fairy laughed. "How funny you say that, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about, coincidences. But to answer your question, it is not a coincidence that my name is Fairy. I live among the fairy world, and we have so much fun together that they just started calling me Fairy. So it just stuck." Cleo laughed again. "I see," she said, chuckling. Fairy said, "Cleo, have you ever been thinking of someone and then they text you?" "Yes, I've had that happen several times," Cleo answered. "That's a funny coincidence." Fairy smiled and said, "Good, but I am here to offer you another explanation of why that happens. Instead of coincidence, I call it intuition. It may seem the same, but it's actually very different. You have an inner voice inside you that tells you things. It can come in several ways, though. You might see something in your inner eye, or hear something in your inner ear, or just get a feeling in your gut. All of those are your intuition. Most people have one or two of those as their main way to get intuitive messages, but they're all available to you. The animals use intuition all the time. It is a natural part of the way we live. And after all, we're all animals. So let's teach you to use your intuition too." Fairy wagged her tail. "Remember the chakras that Bacchus talked about? Well, your intuition is directly related to them. If you see something in your inner eye, that's your third eye chakra. If you hear something with your inner ear, that's your throat chakra. And if you feel it in your gut, that's your solar plexus chakra." "Do you remember what those chakras really are?" asked Fairy. Cleo smiled and said, "They're energy centers." "Indeed they are," agreed Fairy. "And energy can travel through space. So really, when you got the text from your friend that you were thinking of, you were actually connecting your energy with them. And that is no coincidence." "Okay, Cleo, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. What number am I thinking?" Fairy asked. Cleo thought for a minute and then said, "I don't know, 8? "No," Fairy laughed. "But you were just guessing, weren't you? Did you see the number 8 in your third eye?" "No, I guess not," said Cleo. "That's okay, Cleo. I did that to prove a point. Intuition doesn't come from the mind. It's in your body. And intuition must be developed, just like any other muscle in your body. The more you use it, the better you get at recognizing it and listening to it. But sometimes intuition kicks in strongly, especially if there's danger. Think back to this morning, Cleo, when you were in the car about to turn, and that other car came flying by. You hesitated for just a second, but that was long enough for you to be able to stop and avoid the speeding car. That was your intuition kicking in strongly to keep you safe. "Oh my gosh," shouted Cleo. "I don't even remember hesitating, but I'm sure glad I did. I guess I do have intuition. I just didn't know it." "And then, didn't you feel something this morning when you were getting ready? Didn't you feel like something major would happen today?" asked Fairy. "Yes," said Cleo. "It was just a little voice in my head that said something big was coming." "And you were right," laughed Fairy, "only you couldn't even guess how big. That shows you, Cleo, that your intuition is quite strong. Now, how can you develop it even further and be able to use it consciously? Because when you master that, new power will unfold for you." "I don't know," said Cleo, "but I think it would be super exciting to be able to do that." "Well, first of all," said Fairy, "you've made a great start by recognizing that it is intuition and that you already use it. But you can also develop it by being still. Remember the breathing that your other guides have talked about? Being still and quiet will allow you to see, hear, and feel things, your intuition. It's the most important thing you can do to develop your intuition. When you can calm your conscious mind and listen and feel what's in your body and heart, you will get intuitive messages." "But how will I know it's my intuition and not just my mind making it up?" asked Cleo. Fairy shook her head in agreement. "It's a great question and a great observation, Cleo. Intuition is always a clear message. It's usually very positive and can always be felt by your body. If your mind is conjuring it, it may come with doubt, fear, and confusion, and you won't have a distinct feeling in your body. Also, when you begin to understand your own form of intuition, you will learn to distinguish and trust it even more. And you can also journal about your intuitive experiences. You can be a scientist of your intuitive abilities. Write down the intuitive messages you receive and then just observe. You don't have to act on your intuition right away. Just watch over the next days and weeks and see if that intuitive message rings true. Then remember what that felt like in your body. If it was a true intuitive message, it will still be there after a few days. Then review your journal often. Make notes about what happened to your intuitive feelings. As you do that, you will hone your skills to an incredible level. And even though foxes don't write, we have an incredible memory, and so we can do the same thing through our memory. Remember, foxes have incredible intuitive abilities. Use us as your inspiration and guide." Bacchus was watching Cleo discover her abilities and smiled at her excitement to learn more. "She's recognizing more of the ways that her power is available to her," he thought. "Now, let's talk about one more kind of intuition," said Fairy. "That is the intuition of pure knowing, when there is absolutely no doubt about the message and feeling that you're getting, and you can't explain how you just know. That's a very strong kind of intuition, and it can be very powerful. It will also develop more over time as you recognize what it is. Finally, you can use mantras to help you develop your intuitive powers. Mantras are great for a lot of reasons and are really good in helping you focus. And what you focus on is what you get. So when you're taking a walk in the woods, say a mantra to yourself like, 'I see, hear, and feel. My intuition is real.' If you do that long enough, it will put you in a kind of trance, a walking meditation. And it will begin to train your subconscious, which will then instill new beliefs. It doesn't happen overnight though, so trust yourself that each day it will get stronger and more powerful. And then it just becomes part of who you are. And you won't even have to think about it because it just is. And Cleo," Fairy concluded, "promise me above all else you'll have fun with it. This adventure is meant to be fun. Play with your intuition. Practice doing something silly like taking a deck of cards and trying to guess the suit or the number on the card before you draw it, and then laugh when you get it right and laugh when you get it wrong. Discovering your power doesn't have to be serious all the time. Remember, joy is one of the highest frequencies there is, and it is the greatest feeling ever. So choose joy as much as you can and watch your life really change. We are all here for you always, in every moment. You only need to ask for our help, and we will be there. Thank you, Fairy, said Cleo. I did have joy talking to you and learning. It was great fun. Fairy turned to Bacchus and winked. She's really getting it, she thought. Bacchus nodded in agreement. Thank you, Fairy, Bacchus said. You are always such a wise teacher. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Me too, my friend, said Fairy. And then she just disappeared in a red flash. Bacchus laughed at Fairy's quick exit. She's so fast and cunning, I couldn't even see her leave, laughed Cleo. They both had a delightful laugh. Then the fairies that were still playing among the flowers looked over to Cleo and came to surround her. They darted in and out and around and brought more laughter to Bacchus and Cleo. As they circled Cleo, they grabbed her hands and beckoned her to come with them. She laughed and followed along. They drew to the edge of a large stream, and Bacchus followed. When they reached the stream, the fairies all called out to Cleo, "We love you, Cleo. Come back and play with us any time." And then they gathered together and flew off into the sky. Bacchus said, "Cleo, will you look into the stream? Can you see the joy in your heart? Look at your eyes." Cleo was beaming. She looked down and saw something a little different than before. She had a light in her eyes that she couldn't explain, but it was beautiful. "And now, Cleo, can you say 'I love you' to those bright, beautiful eyes?" She looked down and saw her reflection looking back. Then she murmured a very quiet, "I love you," to herself. It wasn't bold, and she felt like maybe she didn't even mean it, but she had been able to say it for the first time. And then she smiled. Thank you for joining me. Have a fabulous day.